What happens when a Las Vegas Reformed Jewish rabbi and a Las Vegas Presbyterian pastor have a conversation as friends? They discover that no matter where you live or what you believe, faith matters. In this special episode of Faith Matters, Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from congregation near Tamid and Reverend Adrian from Green Valley Presbyterian Church talk about the complexities of the war in Israel, the atrocities that have taken place, the importance of solidarity, and how people of faith need to pray together and become beacons of light in the face of evil.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again to another episode of Faith Matters. You know, it's interesting. Behind the scenes, Reverend Adrian and I, we often record many episodes in a row, and then we release them week by week. And we actually did one on Israel, but it was much more of a lighthearted type of conversation about Israel because it was in anticipation of a trip by Adrian's church to Israel. We were talking about the sights and sounds. So perhaps there will be a time when that podcast will hear the light of day when things are calmer. But we thought, you know what, even though it's not a current event type of podcast, there's just so much going on in Israel that it was important for us as colleagues to talk about our feelings and emotions and perhaps address some of the commonly asked questions about what's going on. So, Adrian, good to see you, and thank you for making time for us to kind of make this a current podcast this week.
It's so good to see you, Sandy. It's so good to spend time with you. And I was thinking this morning as I was driving to my office that, we began this, we talked about it months ago. We began this series, Faith Matters, in the summer. And we had no idea that our world would be in the place it is today. And we had no idea that Israel would be in the place it is today. And I can tell you that my heart is heavy. The hearts of my congregation are heavy. But I need to know, how are you? How are you, my brother? How is your community? How is your congregation?
Well, I appreciate your sentiments and thoughts. I know you, as a church community, were so excited to go to the Holy Land in November, and that in itself is a wonderful statement of the commitment of your church to the land of Israel. But when you speak those words, how are you, my brother? I think those are important words, not just to ask of me, but as a word to our non-Jewish listeners, because one of the things that a crisis like this does is it makes you feel isolated and alone. And so when we know that we are being supported by words and by deeds by people of other faiths, it touches our hearts. So I thank you for that. There's an expression in Judaism that says, Yehudi Aruvin Zeh Bazeh, that every Jew is responsible one for the other. Mm-hmm. So even though Jews in America are, American and we love America, we have a deeply spiritual tie to Israel since the founding of our religion. And yes, as a spiritual homeland, and for some, half the world's Jews, more than half the world's Jews now live in Israel. And so for some, literally living in Israel is the fulfillment of that dream. And we have friends, we have family in Israel who have been murdered or impacted, a small country. And so there are literally tears in people's eyes as they come up to me, Rabbi, what can we do? What can we say? And I guess the bottom line answer to your question is we are not okay. I wish I could say we are okay, we are doing well, but we're not okay. It is a time of trauma and despair and reflection here in America and certainly in Israel as they look forward to next steps of how they're going to tackle this crisis, this war in Israel and in Gaza.
These are turbulent times, and indeed, you talk about that Jewish ideology that we take care of each other. And for us as Christians, we celebrate that in a way that says we want to come alongside you because you are our neighbor. We have this commonality in our faith traditions. And so we look at you and we say, we're there in solidarity with you. A week ago Monday, in the aftermath of the horrific attack in Israel, a week ago Monday, I was there. I gathered with members of the Jewish community, elected officials. I went as a guest, but just in the background. And so many people said, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Why are you here? Thank you. And I said, I have to be here. I'm not only here for you, but I'm here for me. I have to be here. That I could not imagine being any other place than at that prayer vigil on Monday night. And it was the same thing for me on Friday when I attended Congregation near Tamid, to be with you, to worship with you, to offer prayers together. I think there's a sense among my community and perhaps yours that this is a time where we need to come together. And of course, we're hurting, we're anxious, but we recognize that our pain is nothing like yours. And this has to evoke horrible memories of so many horrific attacks, the Holocaust on the Jewish people. And so we are here, we're standing with you. And the situation is so complex for us. And I'm not a historian. You're a much better historian of Israel than I am. But it's a complex issue as we look at the Middle East, as we look at Israel, as we look at Hamas. For my listeners, if you would tell us a little bit about who Hamas is and how we can understand really what is their ideology, what is their end goal.
Well, as you said, it's not really a political podcast, but it is helpful as we're talking about this to talk a little bit about what's Gaza, where's Gaza, what is Hamas, because we're seeing it on television, and I can tell you this past Sunday we had a meeting with our high school students and their parents, and some of them asked that, Rabbi, please try to shed some light. So, Israel is at the heart of the Jewish people. We feel that Israel is part of God's promise to the Jews going back over 3,000 years. And there's always been a presence of Jews throughout history. But since the time of the Romans, 70 CE, the Jews were thrown into exile, and we never stopped wanting to return to Zion. And the miracle was that starting in the late 1800s, there was political Zionism, which started a movement of Jews back to the Holy Land. And of course, at one time it was controlled at that time period by the Ottomans and then by the British. And then with the Holocaust, there was world sympathy to say the Jews, fine, you do need your own homeland. And that's what started in 47, 48 with the UN partition plan, that the Jews and Palestinians would each have their own homeland. But the problem was the Jews were on board, but the Arabs were not. And a war was launched. And that was the War of Independence. And then there was the Suez in 56. And in June of 67, there was the 6-Day War. And when the 6-Day War happened, the area that we call Gaza was at that time controlled by Egypt, and it was populated by Palestinian refugees. And they were refugees as a result of the war in 47, 48. And they were never integrated into any other Arab country. They were just left to kind of stew in these refugee places in the West Bank and in Gaza. Well, Israel took control of Gaza because it just was a place that was not working out, and they would launch attacks. And they thought, well, if we control it, we can reduce the conflict. But that didn't work out, and there were a lot of uprising. And finally, Israel took its settlements and left, and that was 2005. And there were supposed to be elections, and there were, but Gaza, which is roughly twice the size of Washington, D.C., it's a small area. Well, in Gaza, they elected Hamas, and in the West Bank, they did not. And they elected Palestinian Authority, which was an offshoot of PLO, of Fatah. And those two organizations are at odds with each other to this day. But Hamas was elected, and then there were no more elections. So basically, since 2007, Hamas, which is a militant Palestinian group,
yes,
who is bent solely on the destruction of Israel. That is in their charter. They want to destroy Israel. They're not an organization that believes in creating a peaceful solution. It's let's wipe Israel off the face of the earth type of organization. Whereas in the West Bank, as difficult as it is, they have come around to at least recognizing that Israel in some form has a right to exist. The form is always, subject to debate. Whose land is Israel's and what is Palestinian? That's for the politicians. But Hamas just wants Israel to disappear. And that's what makes things so very, very difficult. And they are viewed as a terrorist organization, not only by Israel, but by America and by most Western democracies as well. So really, Hamas is a relatively new organization, not that old, in other words. Since about 2007, they were formed, and it has been a thorn in Israel's side time and time again. The geographic area of Gaza, if you imagine a map, you'll see, twice the size of Washington, D.C. Gaza can be maybe 7-8 miles wide and 25 miles long. It's not. To the south is Egypt, and that's the only way to leave Gaza. To the north is and east is Israel. To the west is the Mediterranean. So it's boxed in, and it is one of the most densely populated places on the planet. There are over 2 million people who live there. And as much as we want humanitarian aid to go to Gaza, we find time and time again that it's diverted and just used for weapons of war, as thousands and thousands of rockets are somehow smuggled in or used out of materials that could be repurposed for peaceful means are now used for weapons of war. And it's just very sad on both sides.
It is, and the the humanitarian crisis on both sides, and I resonate with what you said. We want humanitarian relief to get in there, and yet so often that humanitarian relief is repurposed. It's used for other purposes, and my heart is so heavy for all victims of war, but this war has particularly impacted me. And I think it's one of the reasons I ask, how are you? Because this is not about me. This is about you. And I want to stand beside you as my brother. I want to stand beside the Jewish people. I want to stand beside Israel. But I don't remember a time in my recent life where I've been this anxious and so saddened. And I never thought we would see what we saw on Saturday. I never thought that we would see that kind of attack. And I don't want to speak about it on the air, but when you read about it and you see images of the atrocities,
Just pure evil, pure evil.
It is. It's evil unleashed, and my heart breaks. There's anger. I'm trying to squelch the anger. There's sadness. I'm anxious. But just as I needed to be with you on Friday night and your people, I believe that all of us as people of faith need to come together. These are difficult, difficult times. I think the question so often is, what can we do, right? In some ways, it's so easy to say it's over there, and yet we want to do something. So what would you say to someone who says, Rabbi, what can we do?
So, and it is asked, the first thing is, I don't think it's just an issue of that pertains to the Jews. Sure, we may feel it deeper, but evil that is not stopped usually is not contained. And so what happens there is watched by the rest of the world. Iran is the one who funds what goes on in Gaza. Iran is the one who funds what goes on in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And so these countries often use this as a proxy to interfere and undermine democratic values and American interests. So in that respect, it politically affects all of us.
Yes.
But morally, it affects us, because you can surely understand that China and Russia and Iran are looking at our response as a country to what's going on. Are we going to abandon Israel? Or are we going to just say it's not our problem? Or are we going to stand by our ally? But as human beings, and you say, what can I do? Well, there are certainly charities, more than enough charities, that are right now funneling money directly into Israel. There are the Friends of the IDF. IDF is Israel Defense Fund. You can find it online. There's Jewish Nevada, which is part of a federation of charities nationwide that, again, will funnel 100% of funds that are gathered to Israel. So those are two charities that come to mind. And if this is too quick for listeners, they can always call up congregation near Tamid, 702-733-6292, and ask to speak to me or Roberta or Cantor Hutchings, and we can give you more specific information. The third is that we need opportunities to stand by each other. And I know specifically in your church, you were making a statement. You came to our synagogue, and now I believe, there's something happening this Wednesday where we can stand shoulder to shoulder. And I think it's important for you to kind of elaborate a little bit so we get as many people from as many different faiths to stand for Israel and stand for the Jewish community in their time of need.
This coming Wednesday, as you know, this Wednesday at our church, we're having a prayer service for Israel. And we want to pray for the victims of war. We want to gather together to pray for those who are grieving the loss of life. We want to pray for the release of the hostages, for the parents, the children who wonder if their loved one's going to come home, where they are, what they're doing. We want to pray for the Jewish people here in the United States and throughout the world, many of whom, as I understand, are living with a heightened sense of fear at the growing rise and threat of anti-Semitism. And so we're going to gather at Green Valley Presbyterian Church here in Henderson. And we're going to gather at 7:00 on Wednesday, October the 18th, to pray, to support each other, to encourage each other, to come together and to worship and pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be comforted by words of scriptures, and to be comforted in knowing that we're not alone. Rabbi, you are going to be there with us, for which I give thanks, as well as Cantor Jessica Hutchins, who is going to be there with us, helping to lead in our service, as well as the first installed pastor of this congregation, Reverend Hilda Pecoraro, will be a part of that. And my understanding is that members of the community have been invited, elected officials. And as you say, we want to come together. It's important at this time that we show solidarity, that we stand together and pray together in the face of evil, that we have to be beacons of light in the atrocity of these events that have taken place. And so I'm
so appreciative that you're putting this together, and we look forward to being there in partnership with your community. Thank you so much for doing this.
You know, it's interesting. People say, what are you going to do? And I said, well, there's one thing I can tell you we're going to do for certain on Wednesday, and that's pray. No matter what the service looks like, we're going to pray, because that's what we've been called to do. And I hope people join us, because we need each other at this time.
You know, as our podcast comes to a close, I'd like to just, one of the things that I do is I write. Sometimes I write my own, an essay or a poem. So if I could, to close us out, just share this poem that I wrote. It Breaks My Heart is the title of the poem. It breaks my heart to see the death and destruction happening in Israel. It breaks my heart to see the death and destruction happening in Gaza. The images from Israel are horrific echoes of pogroms and the Shoah, touch our very souls. Today we resolve never again. Today we fight for our lives. Today we fight for our future. Tomorrow, when the dust settles and calm is restored to a war-torn land, let us find hope once again, so that broken hearts may be mended, and a way forward will be found, and we will find our way towards peace. Salam, shalom, peace. Thank you for being with me, Adrian. Thank our listeners for being with us as well.
Thank you.
Faith Matters features Rabbi Sanford Akselrad from Congregation Yer Tamid and Reverend Adrian from Green Valley Presbyterian Church, and is produced by Leslie Snadowsky. We hope you join us again for our next podcast episode of Faith Matters.